This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kirsten Ferreri, Los Angeles, California, July 2006. The Count of Monte Cristo, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 54. A Flurry in Stocks. Some days after this meeting, Albert de Morcerf visited the Count of Monte Cristo at his house in the Champs-Élysées, which had already assumed that palace-like appearance which the Count's princely fortune enabled him to give even to his most temporary residences. He came to renew the thanks of Madame Danglars which had already been conveyed to the Count through the medium of a letter, signed Baronne Danglars, née Hermine de Servieux. Albert was accompanied by Lucien Debray, who, joining his friend's conversation, added some passing compliments, the source of which the Count's talent for finesse easily enabled him to guess. He was convinced that Lucien's visit was due to a double feeling of curiosity, the larger half of which sentiment emanated from the Rue de la Chaussée-d'Antin. In short, Madame Danglars, not being personally able to examine in detail the domestic economy and household arrangements of a man who gave away horses worth 30,000 francs, and who went to the opera with a Greek slave wearing diamonds to the amount of 1,000,000 of money, had deputed these eyes, by which she was accustomed to see, to give her a faithful account of the mode of life of this incomprehensible person. But the Count did not appear to suspect that there could be the slightest connection between Lucien's visit and the curiosity of the Baroness. "You are in constant communication with the Baronne Danglars?" the Count inquired of Albert de Morcerf. "Yes, Count, you know what I told you." "All remains the same, then, in that quarter?" "It is more than ever a settled thing," said Lucien, and considering that this remark was all that he was at that time called upon to make, he adjusted the glass to his eye, and biting the top of his gold-headed cane, began to make a tour of the apartment, examining the arms and the pictures. "Ah," said Monte Cristo, "I did not expect that the affair would be so promptly concluded." "Oh, things take their course without our assistance. While we are forgetting them, they are falling into their appointed order, and when again our attention is directed to them, we are surprised at the progress they have made toward the proposed end. My father and Monsieur Danglars served together in Spain, my father in the army, and Monsieur Danglars in the commissariat department. It was there that my father, ruined by the Revolution, and Monsieur Danglars, who had never possessed any patrimony, both laid the foundations of their different fortunes." "Yes," said Monte Cristo, "I think Monsieur Danglars mentioned that in a visit which I paid him. And," continued he, casting a side-glance at Lucien, who was turning over the leaves of an album, "Mademoiselle Eugénie is pretty. I think I remember that to be her name." "Very pretty," replied Albert, "or rather very beautiful, but of that style of beauty which I do not appreciate. I am an ungrateful fellow." "You speak as if you were already her husband." "Ah," returned Albert, in his turn looking around to see what Lucien was doing. "Really," said Monte Cristo, lowering his voice, "you do not appear to me to be very enthusiastic on the subject of this marriage." "Mademoiselle Danglars is too rich for me," replied Morcerf, "and that frightens me." "Bah!" exclaimed Monte Cristo, "that's a fine reason to give. Are you not rich yourself?" "My father's income is about 50,000 francs per annum, and he will give me, perhaps, 10 or 12,000 when I marry." "That, perhaps, might not be considered a large sum, in Paris especially," said the Count, "but everything does not depend on wealth, and it is a fine thing to have a good name, and to occupy a high station in society. Your name is celebrated, your position magnificent, and then the Comte de Morcerf is a soldier, and it is pleasing to see the integrity of a Bayard united to the poverty of a Du Guesclin. Disinterestedness is the brightest ray in which a noble sword can shine. As for me, I consider the union with Mademoiselle Danglars a most suitable one. She will enrich you, and you will ennoble her." Albert shook his head, and looked thoughtful. "There is still something else," said he. "I confess," observed Monte Cristo, "that I have some difficulty in comprehending your objection to a young lady who is both rich and beautiful." "Oh," said Morcerf, "this repugnance, if repugnance it may be called, is not all on my side." "Whence can it arise, then? For you told me your father desired the marriage." "It is my mother who dissents. She has a clear and penetrating judgment, and does not smile upon the proposed union. I cannot account for it, but she seems to entertain some prejudice against the Danglars." "Ah," said the Count, in a somewhat forced tone, "that may be easily explained. The Comtesse de Morcerf, who is aristocracy and refinement itself, does not relish the idea of being allied to your marriage with one of ignoble birth. That is natural enough." "I do not know if that is her reason," said Albert, "but one thing I do know, that if this marriage be consummated, it will render her quite miserable. There was to have been a meeting 6 weeks ago in order to talk over and settle the affair, but I had such a sudden attack of indisposition—" "Real?" interrupted the Count, smiling. "Oh, real enough, from anxiety, doubtless. At any rate, they postponed the matter for 2 months. There is no hurry, you know. I am not yet 21, and Eugenie is only 17, but the 2 months expire next week. It must be done. My dear Count, you cannot imagine how my mind is harassed. How happy you are in being exempt from all this." "Well, and why should not you be free too? What prevents you from being so?" "Oh, it will be too great a disappointment to my father if I do not marry Mademoiselle Danglars." "Marry her, then," said the Count, with a significant shrug of the shoulders. "Yes," replied Morcerf, "but that will plunge my mother into positive grief." "Then do not marry her," said the Count. "Well, I shall see. I will try and think over what is the best thing to be done. You will give me your advice, will you not, and if possible extricate me from my unpleasant position? I think rather than give pain to my dear mother, I would run the risk of offending the Count." Monte Cristo turned away. He seemed moved by this last remark. "Ah," said he to Debray, who had thrown himself into an easy-chair at the furthest extremity of the salon, and who held a pencil in his right hand and an account-book in his left, "what are you doing there? Are you making a sketch after Poussin?" "Oh, no," was the tranquil response. "I am too fond of art to attempt anything of that sort. I am doing a little sum in arithmetic." "In arithmetic?" "Yes, I am calculating. By the way, Morcerf, that indirectly concerns you. I am calculating what the house of Danglars must have gained by the last rise in Hayti bonds. From 206 they have risen to 409 in 3 days, and the prudent banker had purchased at 206. Therefore he must have made 300,000 livres." "That is not his biggest scoop," said Morcerf. "Did he not make 1,000,000 in Spaniards this last year?" "My dear fellow," said Lucien, "here is the Count of Monte Cristo, who will say to you, as the Italians do, 'Money and sanctity, each in a moiety.' When they tell me such things, I only shrug my shoulders and say nothing." "But you were speaking of Haytians," said Monte Cristo. "Ah, Haytians, that is quite another thing. Haytians are the écarté of French stock-jobbing. We may like bouillotte, delight in whist, be enraptured with Boston, and yet grow tired of them all, but we always come back to écarté. It is not only a game, it is an hors d'oeuvre. Monsieur Danglars sold yesterday at 405, and pockets 300,000 francs. Had he but waited to today, the price would have fallen to 205, and instead of gaining 300,000 francs, he would have lost 20 or 25,000. "And what has caused the sudden fall from 409 to 206?" asked Monte Cristo. "I am profoundly ignorant of all these stock-jobbing intrigues." "Because," said Albert, laughing, "one piece of news follows another, and there is often great dissimilarity between them." "Ah," said the Count, "I see that Monsieur Danglars is accustomed to play at gaining or losing 300,000 francs in a day. He must be enormously rich." "It is not he who plays," exclaimed Lucien. "It is Madame Danglars. She is indeed daring." "But you, who are a reasonable being, Lucien, and who know how little dependence is to be placed on the news, since you are at the fountainhead, surely you ought to prevent it," said Morcerf with a smile. "How can I, if her husband fails in controlling her?" asked Lucien. "You know the character of the Baroness. No one has any influence with her, and she does precisely what she pleases." "Ah, if I were in your place," said Albert. "Well?" "I would reform her. It would be rendering a service to her future son-in-law." "How would you set about it?" "Ah, that would be easy enough. I would give her a lesson." "A lesson?" "Yes, your position as secretary to the minister renders your authority great on the subject of political news. You never open your mouth, but the stockbrokers immediately stenograph your words. Cause her to lose 100,000 francs, and that would teach her prudence." "I do not understand," stammered Lucien. "It is very clear, notwithstanding," replied the young man, with an artlessness wholly free from affectation. Tell her some fine morning an unheard-of piece of intelligence, some telegraphic despatch of which you alone are in possession. For instance, that Henri IV was seen yesterday at Gabriel's. That would boom the market. She will buy heavily, and she will certainly lose when Beauchamp announces the following day, in his Gazette, the report circulated by some usually well-informed persons that the king was seen yesterday at Gabriel's house is totally without foundation. We can positively assert that his Majesty did not quit the Pont Neuf. Lucien half smiled. Monte Cristo, although apparently indifferent, had not lost one word of this conversation, and his penetrating eye had even read a hidden secret in the embarrassed manner of the secretary. This embarrassment had completely escaped Albert, but it caused Lucien to shorten his visit. He was evidently ill at ease. The Count, in taking leave of him, said something in a low voice, to which he answered, "Willingly, Count, I accept." The Count returned to young Morcerf. "Do you not think, on reflection," he said to him, "that you have done wrong in speaking thus of your mother-in-law in the presence of Monsieur Debray?" "My dear Count," said Morcerf, "I beg of you not to apply that title so prematurely. Now, speaking without any exaggeration, is your mother really so very much averse to this marriage?" "So much so that the Baroness very rarely comes to the house, and my mother has not, I think, visited Madame Danglars twice in her whole life." "Then," said the Count, "I am emboldened to speak openly to you. Monsieur Danglars is my banker. Monsieur de Villefort has overwhelmed me with politeness in return for a service which a casual piece of good fortune enabled me to render him. I predict from all this an avalanche of dinners and routs. Now, in order not to presume on this, and also to be beforehand with them, I have, if agreeable to you, thought of inviting Monsieur and Madame Danglars and Monsieur and Madame de Villefort to my country house at Auteuil. If I were to invite you and the Count and Countess of Morcerf to this dinner, I should give it the appearance of being a matrimonial meeting, or at least Madame de Morcerf would look upon the affair in that light, especially if Baron Danglars did me the honor to bring his daughter. In that case your mother would hold me in aversion, and I do not at all wish that. On the contrary, I desire to stand high in her esteem." "Indeed, Count," said Morcerf, "I thank you sincerely for having used so much candor toward me, and I gratefully accept the exclusion which you propose. You say you desire my mother's good opinion. I assure you it is already yours to a very unusual extent." "Do you think so?" said Monte Cristo with interest. "I am sure of it. We talked of you an hour after you left us the other day. But to return to what we were saying. If my mother could know of this attention on your part, and I will venture to tell her, I am sure that she will be most grateful to you. It is true that my father will be equally angry." The Count laughed. "Well," said he to Morcerf, "but I think your father will not be the only angry one. Monsieur and Madame Danglars will think me a very ill-mannered person. They know that I am intimate with you, that you are, in fact, one of the oldest of my Parisian acquaintances, and they will not find you at my house. They will certainly ask me why I did not invite you. Be sure to provide yourself with some previous engagement which shall have some semblance of probability, and communicate the fact to me by a line in writing. You know that with bankers nothing but a written document will be valid." "I wish to do better than that," said Albert. "My mother is wishing to go to the seaside. What day is fixed for your dinner?" "Saturday. This is Tuesday. Well, tomorrow evening we leave, and the day after we shall be at Tréport. Really, Count, you have a delightful way of setting people at their ease." "Indeed, you give me more credit than I deserve. I only wish to do what will be agreeable to you, that is all." "When shall you send your invitations?" "This very day." "Well, I will immediately call on Monsieur Danglars, and tell him that my mother and myself must leave Paris tomorrow. I have not seen you, consequently I know nothing of your dinner." "How foolish you are! Have you forgotten that Monsieur Debray has just seen you at my house?" "Ah, true. Fix it this way. I have seen you and invited you without any ceremony, when you instantly answered that it would be impossible for you to accept, as you were going to Tréport. Well, then, that is settled, but you will come and call on my mother before tomorrow." "Before tomorrow? That will be a difficult matter to arrange. Besides, I shall just be in the way of all the preparations for departure." "Well, you can do better. You were only a charming man before, but if you accede to my proposal, you will be adorable." "What must I do to obtain such sublimity?" "You are today as free as air. Come and dine with me. We shall be a small party, only yourself, my mother, and I. You have scarcely seen my mother. You shall have an opportunity of observing her more closely. She is a remarkable woman, and I only regret that there does not exist another like her, about 20 years younger. In that case, I assure you there would very soon be a countess and a viscountess of Morcerf. As to my father, you will not see him. He is officially engaged, and dines with the chief referendary. We will talk over our travels, and you, who have seen the whole world, will relate your adventures. You shall tell us the history of the beautiful Greek who was with you the other night at the opera, and whom you call your slave and yet treat like a princess. We will talk Italian and Spanish. Come, accept my invitation, and my mother will thank you." "A thousand thanks," said the Count. "Your invitation is most gracious, and I regret exceedingly that it is not in my power to accept it. I am not so much at liberty as you suppose. On the contrary, I have a most important engagement." "Ah, take care. You were teaching me just now how, in case of an invitation to dinner, one might creditably make an excuse. I require the proof of a pre-engagement. I am not a banker like Monsieur Danglars, but I am quite as incredulous as he is." "I am going to give you a proof," replied the Count, and he rang the bell. "Humph," said Morcerf, "it is the second time that you have refused to dine with my mother. It is evident that you wish to avoid her." Monte Cristo started. "Oh, you do not mean that," said he. "Besides, here comes the confirmation of my assertion." Baptistine entered, and remained standing at the door. "I had no previous knowledge of your visit, had I?" "Indeed, you are such an extraordinary person that I would not answer for it." "At all events, I could not guess that you would invite me to dinner." "Probably not." "Well, listen, Baptistine, what did I tell you this morning when I called you into my laboratory?" "To close the door against visitors as soon as the clock struck 5, replied the valet. "What then?" "Ah, my dear Count," said Albert. "No, no, I wish to do away with that mysterious reputation that you've given me, my dear Viscount. It is tiresome to be always acting Manfred. I wish my life to be free and open. Go on, Baptistine." "Then to admit no one except Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti and his son." "You hear? Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti, a man who ranks among the most ancient nobility of Italy, whose name Dante has celebrated in the 10th canto of the Inferno. You remember it, do you not? Then there is his son, Andrea, a charming young man, about your own age, Viscount, bearing the same title as yourself, and who is making his entry into the Parisian world, aided by his father's millions. The major will bring his son with him this evening, the contino, as we say in Italy. He confides him to my care. If he proves himself worthy of it, I will do what I can to advance his interests. You will assist me in the work, will you not?" "Most undoubtedly. This Major Cavalcanti is an old friend of yours, then?" "By no means. He is a perfect nobleman, very polite, modest, and agreeable, such as may be found constantly in Italy, descendants of very ancient families. I have met him several times at Florence, Bologna, and Lucca, and now he has communicated to me the fact of his arrival in Paris. The acquaintances one makes in travelling have a sort of claim on one. They everywhere expect to receive the same attention which you once paid them by chance, as though the civilities of a passing hour were likely to awaken any lasting interest in favor of the man in whose society you may happen to be thrown in the course of your journey. This good Major Cavalcanti is coming to take a second view of Paris, which he only saw in passing through in the time of the Empire, when he was on his way to Moscow. I shall give him a good dinner, he will confide his son to my care, and I will promise to watch over him. I shall let him follow in whatever path his folly may lead him, and then I shall have done my part." "Certainly. I see you are a model mentor," said Albert. "Good-bye. We shall return on Sunday. By the way, I have received news of Franz." "Have you? Is he still amusing himself in Italy?" "I believe so. However, he regrets your absence extremely. He says you were the sun of Rome, and that without you all appears dark and cloudy. I do not know if he does not even go so far as to say that it rains." "His opinion of me is altered for the better, then?" "No, he still persists in looking upon you as the most incomprehensible and mysterious of beings." "He is a charming young man," said Monte Cristo, "and I felt a lively interest in him the very first evening of my introduction, when I met him in search of a supper, and prevailed upon him to accept a portion of mine. He is, I think, the son of General d'Épinay?" "He is." "The same who was so shamefully assassinated in 1815. "By the Bonapartists?" "Yes. Really, I like him extremely. Is there not also a matrimonial engagement contemplated for him?" "Yes, he is to marry Mademoiselle de Villefort." "Indeed." "And you know I am to marry Mademoiselle Danglars," said Albert, laughing. "You smile." "Yes." "Why do you do so?" "I smile because there appears to me to be about as much inclination for the consummation of the engagement in question as there is for my own. But really, my dear Count, we are talking as much of women as they do of us. It is unpardonable." Albert rose. "Are you going?" "Oh, really, that is a good idea. 2 hours have I been boring you to death with my company, and then you, with the greatest politeness, ask me if I'm going. Indeed, Count, you are the most polished man in the world. And your servants, too, how very well behaved they are! There is quite a style about them. Monsieur Baptistine especially. I never could get such a man as that. My servants seem to imitate those you sometimes see in a play, who, because they have only a word or two to say, acquit themselves in the most awkward manner possible. Therefore, if you part with Monsieur Baptistine, give me the refusal of him." "By all means." "That is not all. Give my compliments to your illustrious Luccanese, Cavocante of the Cavocante, and if by any chance he should be willing to establish his son, find him a wife very rich, very noble, on her mother's side at least, and a baroness in right of her father. I will help you in the search." "Ah, you will do as much as that, will you?" "Yes." "Well, really, nothing is certain in this world." "Oh, Count, what a service you might render me! I should like you 100 times better if by your intervention I could remain a bachelor, even if it were only for 10 years." "Nothing is impossible," gravely replied Monte Cristo, and taking leave of Albert he returned into the house, and struck the gong 3 times. Bertuccio appeared. "Monsieur Bertuccio, you understand that I intend entertaining company on Saturday at Auteuil." Bertuccio slightly started. "I shall require your services to see that all be properly arranged. It is a beautiful house, or at all events may be made so." "There must be a good deal done before it can deserve that title, your Excellency, for the tapestried hangings are very old." "Let them all be taken away and changed then, with the exception of the sleeping chamber, which is hung with red damask. You will leave that exactly as it is." Bertuccio bowed. "You will not touch the garden either. As to the yard, you may do what you please with it. I should prefer that being altered beyond all recognition." "I will do everything in my power to carry out your wishes, your Excellency. I should be glad, however, to receive your Excellency's commands concerning the dinner." "Really, my dear Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count, "since you have been in Paris you have become quite nervous, and apparently out of your element. You no longer seem to understand me." "But surely your Excellency will be so good as to inform me who are you expecting to receive?" "I do not yet know myself, neither is it necessary that you should do so. Lucullus dines with Lucullus. That is quite sufficient." Bertuccio bowed and left the room. End of chapter 54. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kirsten Ferreri, Los Angeles, California, July 2006. The Count of Monte Cristo, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 55. Major Cavocante. Both the Count and Baptistine had told the truth when they announced to Morcerf the proposed visit of the Major, which had served Monte Cristo as a pretext for declining Albert's invitation. 7 o'clock had just struck, and Monsieur Bertuccio, according to the command which had been given to him, had 2 hours before left for Auteuil, when a cab stopped at the door, and after depositing its occupant at the gate, immediately hurried away, as if ashamed of its employment. The visitor was about 52 years of age, dressed in one of the green surtouts ornamented with black frogs which have so long maintained their popularity all over Europe. He wore trousers of blue cloth, boots tolerably clean but not of the brightest polish, and a little too thick in the soles, buckskin gloves, a hat somewhat resembling in shape those usually worn by the gendarmes, and a black cravat striped with white, which, if the proprietor had not worn it of his own free will, might have passed for a halter, so much did it resemble one. Such was the picturesque costume of the person who rang at the gate, and demanded if it was not at number 30 in the Avenue des Champs-Élysées that the Count of Monte Cristo lived, and who, being answered by the porter in the affirmative, entered, closed the gate after him, and began to ascend the steps. The small and angular head of this man, his white hair and thick grey moustaches, caused him to be easily recognized by Baptistine, who had received an exact description of the expected visitor, and who was awaiting him in the hall. Therefore, scarcely had the stranger time to pronounce his name before the Count was apprised of his arrival. He was ushered into a simple and elegant drawing-room, and the Count rose to meet him with a smiling air. "Ah, my dear sir, you are most welcome. I was expecting you." "Indeed," said the Italian. "Was your Excellency then aware of my visit?" "Yes, I had been told that I should see you today at 7 o'clock." "Then you have received full information concerning my arrival?" "Of course." "Ah, so much the better. I feared this little precaution might have been forgotten." "What precaution?" "That of informing you beforehand of my coming." "Oh, no, it has not." "But you're sure you're not mistaken?" "Very sure." "It really was I whom your Excellency expected at 7 o'clock this evening." "I will prove it to you beyond a doubt." "Oh, no, never mind that," said the Italian. "It is not worth the trouble." "Yes, yes," said Monte Cristo. His visitor appeared slightly uneasy. "Let me see," said the Count. "Are you not the Marquis Bartolomeo Cavalcanti?" "Bartolomeo Cavalcanti," joyfully replied the Italian. "Yes, I really am he." "Ex-major in the Austrian service?" "Was I a major?" timidly asked the old soldier. "Yes," said Monte Cristo, "you were a major. That is the title the French give to the post which you filled in Italy." "Very good," said the major. "I do not demand more, you understand." "Your visit here today is not of your own suggestion, is it?" said Monte Cristo. "No, certainly not." "You were sent by some other person?" "Yes." "By the excellent Abbé Busoni." "Exactly so," said the delighted major. "And you have a letter?" "Yes, there it is." "Give it to me, then." And Monte Cristo took the letter, which he opened and read. The major looked at the Count with his large staring eyes, and then took a survey of the apartment, but his gaze almost immediately reverted to the proprietor of the room. "Yes, yes, I see. Major Cavalcanti, a worthy patrician of Lucca, a descendant of the Cavocante of Florence," continued Monte Cristo, reading aloud, "possessing an income of 500,000. Monte Cristo raised his eyes from the paper and bowed. "500,000," said he. "Magnificent." "500,000, is it?" said the major. "Yes, in so many words. And it must be so, for the abbé knows correctly the amount of all the largest fortunes in Europe." "Well, be it 500,000 then, but on my word of honor I had no idea that it was so much." "Because you are robbed by your steward. You must make some reformation in that quarter." "You have opened my eyes," said the Italian gravely. "I will show the gentleman the door." Monte Cristo resumed the perusal of the letter. "And who needs only one more thing to make him happy." "Yes, indeed, but one," said the major with a sigh. "Which is to recover a lost and adored son." "A lost and adored son!" "Stolen away in his infancy, either by an enemy of his noble family or by the gipsies." "At the age of 5 years," said the major with a deep sigh, and raising his eye to heaven. "Unhappy father," said Monte Cristo. The count continued, "I have given him renewed life and hope, in the assurance that you have the power of restoring the son whom he has vainly sought for 15 years." The major looked at the count with an indescribable expression of anxiety. "I have the power of so doing," said Monte Cristo. The major recovered his self-possession. "So then," said he, "the letter was true to the end?" "Did you doubt it, my dear Monsieur Bartolomeo?" "No, indeed, certainly not. A good man, a man holding religious office, as does the Abbé Busoni, could not condescend to deceive or play off a joke, but your Excellency has not read all." "Ah, true," said Monte Cristo. "There is a postscript." "Yes, yes," repeated the major. "Yes, there is a postscript. In order to save Major Cavalcanti the trouble of drawing on his banker, I send him a draft for 2,000 francs to defray his traveling expenses, and a credit on you for the further sum of 48,000 francs, which you still owe me." The major awaited the conclusion of the postscript, apparently with great anxiety. "Very good," said the count. "He said very good," muttered the major. "Then, sir—" replied he. "Then what?" asked Monte Cristo. "Then the postscript—" "Well, what of the postscript?" "Then the postscript is as favorably received by you as the rest of the letter?" "Certainly. The Abbé Busoni and myself have a small account open between us. I do not remember if it is exactly 48,000 francs which I am still owing him, but I dare say we shall not dispute the difference. You attached great importance, then, to this postscript, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti?" "I must explain to you," said the major, "that, fully confiding in the signature of the Abbé Busoni, I had not provided myself with any other funds, so that if this resource had failed me I should have found myself very unpleasantly situated in Paris." "Is it possible that a man of your standing should be embarrassed anywhere?" said Monte Cristo. "Why, really, I know no one," said the major. "But then you yourself are known to others?" "Yes, I am known, so that—" "Proceed, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti." "So that you will remit to me these 48,000 francs?" "Certainly, at your first request." The major's eyes dilated with pleased astonishment. "But sit down," said Monte Cristo. "Really, I do not know what I have been thinking of. I have positively kept you standing for the last quarter of an hour." "Don't mention it." The major drew an armchair toward him and proceeded to seat himself. "Now," said the count, "what will you take? A glass of port, sherry, or Alicante?" "Alicante, if you please; it is my favorite wine." "I have some that is very good. You will take a biscuit with it, will you not?" "Yes, I will take a biscuit, as you are so obliging." Monte Cristo rang. Baptistine appeared. The count advanced to meet him. "Well?" said he in a low voice. "The young man is here," said the valet de chambre in the same tone. "Into what room did you take him?" "Into the blue drawing-room, according to your excellency's instructions." "That's right. Now bring the Alicante and some biscuits." Baptistine left the room. "Really," said the major, "I am quite ashamed of the trouble I'm giving you." "Pray don't mention such a thing," said the count. Baptistine re-entered with glasses, wine, and biscuits. The count filled one glass, but in the other he only poured a few drops of the ruby-colored liquid. The bottle was covered with spiders' webs and all the other signs which indicate the age of a wine more truly than do wrinkles on a man's face. The major made a wise choice. He took the full glass and a biscuit. The count told Baptistine to leave the plate within reach of his guest, who began by sipping the Alicante with an expression of great satisfaction, and then delicately steeped his biscuit in the wine. "So, sir, you lived at Lucca, did you? You were rich, noble, held in great esteem, had all that could render a man happy." "All," said the major, hastily swallowing his biscuit, "positively all." "And yet there was one thing wanting in order to complete your happiness." "Only one thing," said the Italian. "And that one thing your lost child." "Ah," said the major, taking a second biscuit, "that consummation of my happiness was indeed wanting." The worthy major raised his eyes to heaven and sighed. "Let me hear, then," said the count, "who this deeply regretted son was, for I always understood you were a bachelor." "That was the general opinion, sir," said the major, "and I—" "Yes," replied the count, "and you confirmed the report. A youthful indiscretion, I suppose, which you were anxious to conceal from the world at large?" The major recovered himself and resumed his usual calm manner, at the same time casting his eyes down, either to give himself time to compose his countenance or to assist his imagination, all the while giving an underlook at the count, the protracted smile on whose lips still announced the same polite curiosity. "Yes," said the major, "I did wish this fault to be hidden from every eye." "Not on your own account, surely," replied Monte Cristo, "for a man is above that sort of thing." "Oh, no, certainly not on my account," said the major, with a smile and a shake of the head. "But for the sake of the mother?" said the count. "Yes, for the mother's sake. His poor mother!" cried the major, taking a third biscuit. "Take some more wine, my dear Cavalcanti," said the count, pouring out for him a second glass of Alicante. "Your emotion has quite overcome you." "His poor mother," murmured the major, trying to get the lacrymal gland in operation, so as to moisten the corner of his eye with a false tear. "She belonged to one of the first families in Italy, I think, did she not?" "She was of a noble family of Fiesoli, count." "And her name was?" Do you desire to know her name?" "Oh," said Monte Cristo, "it would be quite superfluous for you to tell me, for I already know it." "The count knows everything," said the Italian, bowing. "Oliva Corsinari, was it not?" "Oliva Corsinari." "A marchioness?" "A marchioness." "And you married her at last, notwithstanding the opposition of her family?" "Yes, that was the way it ended." "And you have doubtless brought all your papers with you," said Monte Cristo. "What papers?" "The certificate of your marriage with Oliva Corsinari, and the register of your child's birth." "The register of my child's birth?" "The register of the birth of Andre Cavalcanti, your son. Is not his name Andrea?" "I believe so," said the major. "What! You believe so?" "I dare not positively assert it, as he has been lost for so long a time." "Well, then," said Monte Cristo, "you have all the documents with you?" "Your Excellency, I regret to say that, not knowing it was necessary to come provided with these papers, I neglected to bring them." "That is unfortunate," returned Monte Cristo. "Were they then so necessary?" "They were indispensable." The major passed his hand across his brow. "Ah, per Bacco, indispensable, were they?" "Certainly they were, supposing there were to be doubts raised as to the validity of your marriage or the legitimacy of your child." "True," said the major, "there might be doubts raised." "In that case your son would be very unpleasantly situated." "It would be fatal to his interests." "It might cause him to fail in some desirable matrimonial alliance." "Oh, peccato!" "You must know that in France they are very particular on these points. It is not sufficient, as in Italy, to go to the priest and say, 'We love each other and want you to marry us.' Marriage is a civil affair in France, and in order to marry in an orthodox manner you must have papers which undeniably establish your identity." "That is the misfortune. You see, I have not these necessary papers." "Fortunately, I have them, though," said Monte Cristo. "You?" "Yes." "You have them?" "I have them." "Indeed," said the major, who, seeing the object of his journey frustrated by the absence of the papers, feared also that his forgetfulness might give rise to some difficulty concerning the 48,000 francs. "Ah, indeed, that is a fortunate circumstance. Yes, that really is lucky, for it never occurred to me to bring them." "I do not at all wonder at it. One cannot think of everything, but happily the Abbé Busoni thought for you." "He is an excellent person." "He is extremely prudent and thoughtful." "He is an admirable man," said the major, "and he sent them to you?" "Here they are." The major clasped his hands in token of admiration. "You married Oliva Corsinari in the church of San Paolo de Montecatini. Here is the priest's certificate." "Yes, indeed, there it is truly," said the Italian, looking on with astonishment. "And here is Andrea Cavalcanti's baptismal register, given by the curate of Saravezza." "All quite correct." "Take these documents, then; they do not concern me. You will give them to your son, who will, of course, take great care of them." "I should think so, indeed. If he were to lose them—" "Well, and if he were to lose them?" said Monte Cristo. "In that case," replied the major, "it would be necessary to write to the curate for duplicates, and it would be some time before they could be obtained." "It would be a difficult matter to arrange," said Monte Cristo. "Almost an impossibility," replied the major. "Well, I am very glad to see that you understand the value of these papers." "I regard them as invaluable." "Now," said Monte Cristo, "as to the mother of the young man." "As to the mother of the young man," repeated the Italian, with anxiety. "As regards the Marchesa Corsinari." "Really," said the major, "difficulties seem to thicken upon us. Will she be wanted in any way?" "No, sir," replied Monte Cristo. "Besides, has she not—" "Yes, sir," said the major, "she has." "Paid the last debt of nature?" "Alas, yes," returned the Italian. "I knew that," said Monte Cristo. "She has been dead these 10 years." "And I am still mourning her loss," exclaimed the major, drawing from his pocket a checked handkerchief and alternately wiping first the left and then the right eye. "What would you have?" said Monte Cristo. "We are all mortal. Now you understand, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti, that it is useless for you to tell people in France that you have been separated from your son for 15 years. Stories of gypsies who steal children are not at all in vogue in this part of the world, and would not be believed. You sent him for his education to a college in one of the provinces, and now you wish him to complete his education in the Parisian world. That is the reason which has induced you to leave Viareggio, where you have lived since the death of your wife. That will be sufficient." "You think so?" "Certainly." "Very well, then. If they should hear of the separation—" "Ah, yes, what could I say?" "That an unfaithful tutor brought over by the enemies of your family—" "By the Corsinari?" "Precisely, had stolen away this child in order that your name might become extinct." "That is reasonable, since he is an only son." "Well, now that all is arranged, do not let these newly awakened remembrances be forgotten. You have doubtless already guessed that I was preparing a surprise for you." "An agreeable one?" asked the Italian. "Ah, I see the eye of a father is no more to be deceived than his heart." "Hum!" said the major. "Some one has told you the secret, or perhaps you guessed that he was here." "That who was here?" "Your child, your son, your Andrea." "I did guess it," replied the major, with the greatest possible coolness. "Then he is here?" "He is," said Monte Cristo. "When the valet de chambre came in just now, he told me of his arrival." "Ah, very well," said the major, clutching the buttons of his coat at each exclamation. "My dear sir," said Monte Cristo, "I understand your emotion; you must have time to recover yourself. I will, in the meantime, go and prepare the young man for this much desired interview, for I presume that he is not less impatient for it than yourself." "I should quite imagine that to be the case," said Cavocante. "Well, in a quarter of an hour he shall be with you." "You will bring him in, then? You carry your goodness so far as even to present him to me yourself?" "No, I do not wish to come between a father and a son. Your interview will be private. But do not be uneasy; even if the powerful voice of nature should be silent, you cannot well mistake him; he will enter by this door. He is a fine young man, of fair complexion, a little too fair perhaps, pleasing in manners, but you will see and judge for yourself." "By the way," said the major, "you know I have only the 2,000 francs which the Abbé Busoni sent me. This sum I have expended upon traveling expenses, and—" "And you want money? That is a matter of course, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti. Well, here are 8,000 francs on account." The major's eyes sparkled brilliantly. "It is 40,000 francs which I now owe you," said Monte Cristo. "Does your excellency wish for a receipt?" said the major, at the same time slipping the money into the inner pocket of his coat. "For what?" said the count. "I thought you might want it to show the Abbé Busoni." "Well, when you receive the remaining 40,000, you shall give me a receipt in full. Between honest men such excessive precaution is, I think, quite unnecessary." "Yes, so it is, between perfectly upright people." "One word more," said Monte Cristo. "Say on." "You will permit me to make one remark?" "Certainly, pray do so." "Then I should advise you to leave off wearing that style of dress." "Indeed," said the major, regarding himself with an air of complete satisfaction. "Yes, it may be worn at Viareggio, but that costume, however elegant in itself, has long been out of fashion in Paris." "That's unfortunate." "Oh, if you really are attached to your old mode of dress, you can easily resume it when you leave Paris." "But what shall I wear?" "What you find in your trunks." "In my trunks? I have but one portmanteau." "I dare say you have nothing else with you. What is the use of boring oneself with so many things? Besides, an old soldier always likes to march with as little baggage as possible." "That is just the case, precisely so." "But you are a man of foresight and prudence, therefore you sent your luggage on before you. It has arrived at the Hôtel des Princes, Rue de Richelieu. It is there you are to take up your quarters." "Then in these trunks? I presume you have given orders to your valet de chambre to put in all you are likely to need, your plain clothes and your uniform. On grand occasions you must wear your uniform; that will look very well. Do not forget your crosses. They still laugh at them in France, and yet always wear them for all that." Very well," said the major, who was in ecstasy at the attention paid him by the count. "Now," said Monte Cristo, "that you have fortified yourself against all painful excitement, prepare yourself, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti, to meet your lost Andrea." Saying which, Monte Cristo bowed and disappeared behind the tapestry, leaving the major fascinated beyond expression with the delightful reception which he had received at the hands of the count. End of chapter 55.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Recorded by Opheliad in New South Wales, Australia, August 2006. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 56. Andre Cavalcanti. The Count of Monte Cristo entered the adjoining room, which Baptistin had designated as the drawing-room, and found there a young man, of graceful demeanour and elegant appearance, who had arrived in a cab about half an hour previously. Baptistin had not found any difficulty in recognising the person who presented himself at the door for admittance. He was certainly the tall young man with light hair, red beard, black eyes, and brilliant complexion, whom his master had so particularly described to him. When the Count entered the room, the young man was carelessly stretched on a sofa, tapping his boot with the gold-headed cane which he held in his hand. On perceiving the Count, he rose quickly. "The Count of Monte Cristo, I believe," said he. "Yes, sir, and I think I have the honour of addressing Count Andre Cavalcanti?" "Count Andre Cavalcanti," repeated the young man, accompanying his words with a bow. "You are charged with a letter of introduction addressed to me, are you not?" said the Count. "I did not mention that because the signature seemed to me so strange. The letter signed Sinbad the Sailor, is it not?" "Exactly so. Now, as I have never known any Sinbad, with the exception of the one celebrated in the 1001 Nights. Well, it is one of his descendants, and a great friend of mine. He is a very rich Englishman, eccentric almost to insanity, and his real name is Lord Wilmore." "Ah, indeed! Then that explains everything that is extraordinary," said Andre. "He is, then, the same Englishman whom I met at... yes, indeed. Well, monsieur, I am at your service." "If what you say is true," replied the Count, smiling, "perhaps you will be kind enough to give me some account of yourself and your family?" "Certainly I will do so," said the young man, with a quickness which gave proof of his ready invention. "I am, as you have said, the Count Andre Cavalcanti, son of Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti, a descendant of the Cavalcanti whose names are inscribed in the Golden Book at Florence. Our family, although still rich, for my father's income amounts to 500,000, has experienced many misfortunes, and I myself was, at the age of 5 years, taken away by the treachery of my tutor, so that for 15 years I have not seen the author of my existence. Since I have arrived at years of discretion and become my own master, I have been constantly seeking him, but all in vain. At length I received this letter from your friend, which states that my father is in Paris, and authorises me to address myself to you for information respecting him." "Really, all you have related to me is exceedingly interesting," said Monte Cristo, observing the young man with a gloomy satisfaction, "and you have done well to confirm in everything to the wishes of my friend Sinbad, for your father is indeed here, and is seeking you." The Count, from the moment of first entering the drawing-room, had not once lost sight of the expression of the young man's countenance. He had admired the assurance of his look and the firmness of his voice, but at these words, so natural in themselves, "Your father is indeed here and is seeking you," young Andrea started and exclaimed, "My father? Is my father here?" "Most undoubtedly," replied Monte Cristo. "Your father, Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti." The expression of terror which for the moment had overspread the features of the young man had now disappeared. "Ah, yes, that is the name, certainly. Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti. And you really mean to say, monsieur, that my dear father is here?" "Yes, sir, and I can even add that I have only just left his company. The history which he related to me of his lost son touched me to the quick. Indeed, his griefs, hopes, and fears on that subject might furnish material for a most touching and pathetic poem. At length he one day received a letter, stating that the abductors of his son now offered to restore him, or at least to give notice where he might be found, on condition of receiving a large sum of money by way of ransom. Your father did not hesitate an instant, and the sum was sent to the frontier of Piedmont, with a passport signed for Italy. You were in the south of France, I think?" "Yes," replied Andrea with an embarrassed air, "I was in the south of France." "A carriage was to await you at Nice?" "Precisely so, and it conveyed me from Nice to Genoa, from Genoa to Turin, and from Turin to Chambéry, from Chambéry to Pont de Beauvoisin, and from Pont de Beauvoisin to Paris." "Indeed? Then your father ought to have met with you on the road, for it is exactly the same route which he himself took, and that is how we have been able to trace your journey to this place." "But," said Andrea, "if my father had met me, I doubt if he would have recognised me. I must be somewhat altered since he last saw me." "Oh, the voice of nature," said Monte Cristo. "True," interrupted the young man, "I had not looked upon it in that light." "Now," replied Monte Cristo, "there is only one source of uneasiness left in your father's mind, which is this. He is anxious to know how you have been employed during your long absence from him, how you have been treated by your persecutors, and if they have conducted themselves towards you with all the deference due to your rank. Finally, he is anxious to see if you have been fortunate enough to escape the bad moral influence to which you have been exposed, and which is infinitely more to be dreaded than any physical suffering. He wishes to discover if the fine abilities with which nature has endowed you have been weakened by want of culture, and in short whether you consider yourself capable of resuming and retaining in the world the high position to which your rank entitles you." "Sir!" exclaimed the young man, quite astounded, "I hope no false report. As for myself, I first heard you spoken of by my friend Wilmore, the philanthropist. I believe he found you in some unpleasant position, but do not know of what nature, for I did not ask, not being inquisitive. Your misfortunes engaged his sympathies, so you see you must have been interesting. He told me that he was anxious to restore you to the position which you had lost, and that he would seek your father until he found him. He did seek, and has found him, apparently, since he is here now. And finally, my friend apprised me of your coming and gave me a few other instructions relative to your future fortune. I am quite aware that my friend Wilmore is peculiar, but he is sincere, and as rich as a gold mine. Consequently, he may indulge his eccentricities without any fear of their ruining him, and I have promised to adhere to his instructions. Now, sir, pray do not be offended at the question I am about to put to you, as it comes in the way of my duty as your patron. I would wish to know if the misfortunes which have happened to you, misfortunes entirely beyond your control, and which in no degree diminish my regard for you, I would wish to know if they have not, in some measure, contributed to render you a stranger to the world in which your fortune and your name entitle you to make a conspicuous figure." "Sir," returned the young man, with a reassurance of manner, "make your mind easy on this score. Those who took me from my father, and who always intended, sooner or later, to sell me again to my original proprietor, as they have now done, calculated that, in order to make the most of their bargain, it would be politic to leave me in possession of all my personal and hereditary worth, and even to increase the value if possible. I have therefore received a very good education, and have been treated by those kidnappers very much as the slaves were treated in Asia Minor, whose masters made them grammarians, doctors, and philosophers, in order that they might fetch a higher price on the Roman market." Monte Cristo smiled with satisfaction. It appeared as if he had not expected so much from Monsieur Andre Cavalcanti. "Besides," continued the young man, "if there did appear some defect in education, or offence against the established forms of etiquette, I suppose it would be excused in consideration of the misfortunes which accompanied my birth and followed me through my youth." "Well," said Monte Cristo in an indifferent tone, "you will do as you please, Count, for you are the master of your own actions, and are the person most concerned in the matter. But if I were you, I would not divulge a word of these adventures. Your history is quite a romance, and the world, which delights in romances in yellow covers, strangely mistrusts those which are bound in living parchment, even though they be gilded like yourself. This is the kind of difficulty which I wish to represent to you, my dear Count. You would hardly have recited your touching history before it would go forth to the world and be deemed unlikely and unnatural. You would be no longer a lost child found, but you would be looked upon as an upstart, who had sprung up like a mushroom in the night. You might excite a little curiosity, but it is not everyone who likes to be made the centre of observation and the subject of unpleasant remark." "I agree with you, monsieur," said the young man, turning pale, and, in spite of himself, trembling beneath the scrutinizing look of his companion. "Such consequences would be extremely unpleasant." "Nevertheless, you must not exaggerate the evil," said Monte Cristo, "for by endeavouring to avoid one fault, you will fall into another. You must resolve upon one simple and single line of conduct, and for a man of your intelligence this plan is as easy as it is necessary. You must form honourable friendships, and by that means counteract the prejudice which may attach to the obscurity of your former life." Andrea visibly changed countenance. "I would offer myself as your surety and friendly adviser," said Monte Cristo, "did I not possess a moral distrust of my best friends, and a sort of inclination to lead others to doubt them too. Therefore, in departing from this rule, I should, as the actors say, be playing a part quite out of my line, and should therefore run the risk of being hissed, which would be an act of folly." "However, your Excellency," said Andrea, "in consideration of Lord Wilmore, by whom I was recommended to you—" "Yes, certainly," interrupted Monte Cristo. "But Lord Wilmore did not omit to inform me, my dear Monsieur Andre, that the season of your youth was rather a stormy one." "Ah," said the Count, watching Andrea's countenance, "I do not demand any confession from you. It is precisely to avoid that necessity that your father was sent for from Lucca. You shall soon see him. He is a little stiff and pompous in his manner, and he is disfigured by his uniform, but when it becomes known that he has been for 18 years in the Austrian service, all that will be pardoned. We are not generally very severe with the Austrians. In short, you will find your father a very presentable person, I assure you." "Ah, sir, you have given me confidence. It is so long since we were separated that I have not the least remembrance of him. And besides, you know that, in the eyes of the world, a large fortune covers all defects." "He is a millionaire. His income is 500,000 francs." "Then," said the young man with anxiety, "I shall be sure to be placed in an agreeable position." "One of the most agreeable possible, my dear sir. He will allow you an income of 50,000 livres per annum during the whole time of your stay in Paris." "Then in that case I shall always choose to remain there." "You cannot control circumstances, my dear sir. Man proposes, and God disposes." Andrea sighed. "But," said he, "so long as I do remain in Paris, and nothing forces me to quit it, do you mean to tell me that I may rely on receiving the sum you just now mentioned to me?" "You may." "Shall I receive it from my father?" asked Andrea, with some uneasiness. "Yes, you will receive it from your father personally, but Lord Wilmore will be the security for the money. He has, at the request of your father, opened an account of 6,000 francs a month at Monsieur Danglars', which is one of the safest banks in Paris." "And does my father mean to remain long in Paris?" asked Andrea. "Only a few days," replied Monte Cristo. "His service does not allow him to absent himself more than 2 or 3 weeks together." "Ah, my dear father!" exclaimed Andrea, evidently charmed with the idea of his speedy departure. "Therefore," said Monte Cristo, feigning to mistake his meaning, "therefore I will not for another instant retard the pleasure of your meeting. Are you prepared to embrace your worthy father?" "I hope you do not doubt it." "Go, then, into the drawing-room, my young friend, where you will find your father awaiting you." Andrea made a low bow to the Count and entered the adjoining room. Monte Cristo watched him till he disappeared, and then touched a spring in a panel made to look like a picture, which, in sliding partly from the frame, discovered to view a small opening, so cleverly contrived that it revealed all that was passing in the drawing-room now occupied by Cavalcanti and Andrea. The young man closed the door behind him and advanced towards the Major, who had risen when he heard steps approaching him. "Ah, my dear father," said Andre in a loud voice, in order that the Count might hear him in the next room. "Is it really you?" "How do you do, my dear son?" said the Major gravely. "After so many years of painful separation," said Andre in the same tone of voice, and glancing towards the door, "what a happiness it is to meet again!" "Indeed it is, after so long a separation." "Will you not embrace me, sir?" said Andre. "If you wish it, my son," said the Major, and the two men embraced each other after the fashion of actors on the stage. That is to say, each rested his head on the other's shoulder. "Then we are once more reunited," said Andre. "Once more," replied the Major. "Never more to be separated?" "Why, as to that, I think, my dear son, you must be by this time so accustomed to France as to look upon it almost as a second country." "The fact is," said the young man, "that I should be exceedingly grieved to leave it." "As for me, you must know I cannot possibly live out of Lucca. Therefore I shall return to Italy as soon as I can." "But before you leave France, my dear father, I hope you will put me in possession of the documents which will be necessary to prove my descent." "Certainly, I am come expressly on that account. It has cost me much trouble to find you, but I had resolved on giving them into your hands, and if I had to recommence my search, it would occupy all the few remaining years of my life." "Where are these papers, then?" "Here they are." Andre seized the certificate of his father's marriage and his own baptismal register, and after having opened them with all the eagerness which might be expected under the circumstances, he read them with a facility which proved that he was accustomed to similar documents, and with an expression which plainly denoted an unusual interest in the contents. When he had perused the documents, an indefinable expression of pleasure lightened up his countenance, and, looking at the Major with a most peculiar smile, he said in very excellent Tuscan, "Then there is no longer any such thing in Italy as being condemned to the galleys?" The Major drew himself up to his full height. "Why, what do you mean by that question?" "I mean that if there were, it would be impossible to draw up with impunity two such deeds as these. In France, my dear sir, half such a piece of effrontery as that would cause you to be quickly dispatched to Toulon for 5 years for change of air." "Will you be good enough to explain your meaning?" said the Major, endeavouring as much as possible to assume an air of the greatest majesty. "My dear Monsieur Cavalcanti," said Andre, taking the Major by the arm in a confidential manner, "how much are you paid for being my father?" The Major was about to speak when Andre continued in a low voice, "Nonsense. I am going to set you an example of confidence. They give me 50,000 francs a year to be your son. Consequently, you can understand that it is not at all likely I shall ever deny my parent." The Major looked anxiously around him. "Make yourself easy, we are quite alone," said Andre. "Besides, we are conversing in Italian." "Well, then," replied the Major, "they paid me 50,000 francs down." "Monsieur Cavalcanti," said Andre, "do you believe in fairy tales?" "I used not to do so, but I really feel now almost obliged to have faith in them." "You have, then, been induced to alter your opinion? You have had some proofs of their truth?" The Major drew from his pocket a handful of gold. "Most palpable proofs," said he, "as you may perceive." "You think, then, that I may rely on the Count's promises?" "Certainly I do." "You are sure he will keep his word with me?" "To the letter, but at the same time, remember, we must continue to play our respective parts. I as a tender father, and I as a dutiful son, as they choose that I shall be descended from you." "Whom do you mean by they?" "Ma foi, I can hardly tell, but I was alluding to those who wrote the letter. You received one, did you not?" "Yes." "From whom?" "From a certain Abbé Busoni." "Have you any knowledge of him?" "No, I have never seen him." "What did he say in the letter?" "You will promise not to betray me?" "Rest assured of that. You well know that our interests are the same." "Then read for yourself." And the Major gave a letter into the young man's hand. Andre read in a low voice, "You are poor. A miserable old age awaits you. Would you like to become rich, or at least independent? Set out immediately for Paris and demand of the Count of Monte Cristo, Avenue des Champs-Élysées, number 30, the son whom you had by the Marchesa Corsinari, and who was taken from you at 5 years of age. This son is named Andre Cavalcanti. In order that you may not doubt the kind intention of the writer of this letter, you will find enclosed an order for 2,400 francs, payable in Florence, at Signor Gozzi's. Also a letter of introduction to the Count of Monte Cristo, on whom I give you a draft of 48,000 francs. Remember to go to the Count on the 26th of May, at 7 o'clock in the evening. Signed, Abbé Busoni." "It is the same." "What do you mean?" said the Major. "I was going to say that I received a letter almost to the same effect." "You?" "Yes." "From the Abbé Busoni?" "No." "From whom, then?" "From an Englishman called Lord Wilmore, who takes the name of Sinbad the Sailor." "And of whom you have no more knowledge than I of the Abbé Busoni." "You are mistaken. There I am ahead of you." "You have seen him, then?" "Yes, once."
"Where?"
"Ah, that is just what I cannot tell you. If I did, I should make you as wise as myself, which it is not my intention to do."
"And what did the letter contain?"
"Read it."
"You are poor, and your future prospects are dark and gloomy. Do you wish for a name? Should you like to be rich and your own master?"
"Ma foi," said the young man, "was it possible there could be two answers to such a question?"
"Take the post-chaise which you will find waiting at the Porte de Gênes as you enter Nice. Pass through Turin, Chambry, and Pont de Beauvoisin. Go to the Count of Monte Cristo, Avenue des Champs-Élysées, on the 26th of May, at 7 o'clock in the evening, and demand of him your father. You are the son of the Marchese Cavalcanti and the Marchesa Oliva Corsinari. The Marquis will give you some papers which will certify this fact and authorize you to appear under that name in the Parisian world. As to your rank, an annual income of 50,000 livres will enable you to support it admirably. I enclose a draft for 5,000 livres, payable on Monsieur Ferriat, banker at Nice, and also a letter of introduction to the Count of Monte Cristo, whom I have directed to supply all your wants. Sinbad the Sailor. Humph, said the Major. Very good. You have seen the Count, you say?
I have only just left him.
And has he conformed to all that the letter specified?
He has.
Do you understand it?
Not in the least.
There is a dupe somewhere.
At all events, it is neither you nor I.
Certainly not.
Well, then.
Why, it does not much concern us. Do you think that it does?
No, I agree with you there. We must play the game to the end, and consent to be blindfold.
Ah, you shall see. I promise you I will sustain my part to admiration.
I never once doubted your doing so. Monte Cristo chose this moment for re-entering the drawing-room. On hearing the sound of his footsteps, the two men threw themselves in each other's arms, and while they were in the midst of this embrace, the Count entered.
Well, Marquis, said Monte Cristo, you appear to be in no way disappointed in the son whom your good fortune has restored to you. Ah, your Excellency, I am overwhelmed with delight.
And what are your feelings? Said Monte Cristo, turning to the young man. As for me, my heart is overflowing with happiness.
Happy father, happy son, said the Count. There is only one thing which grieves me, observed the Major, and that is the necessity for my leaving Paris so soon.
Ah, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti, I trust you will not leave before I have had the honour of presenting you to some of my friends.
I am at your service, sir, replied the Major.
Now, sir, said Monte Cristo, addressing Andre, make your confession.
To whom?
Tell Monsieur Cavalcanti something of the state of your finances. Ma foi, monsieur, you have touched upon a tender chord.
Do you hear what he says, Major? Certainly I do.
But do you understand?
I do.
Your son says he requires money.
Well, what would you have me do? Said the Major.
You should furnish him with some, of course, replied Monte Cristo.
I?
Yes, you, said the Count, at the same time advancing towards Andre and slipping a packet of banknotes into the young man's hand.
What is this?
It is from your father.
From my father?
Yes, did you not tell him just now that you wanted money? Well then, he deputes me to give you this. Am I to consider this as part of my income on account? No, it is for the first expenses of your settling in Paris.
Ah, how good my dear father is!
Silence, said Monte Cristo. He does not wish you to know that it comes from him. I fully appreciate his delicacy, said Andre, cramming the notes hastily into his pocket. And now, gentlemen, I wish you good morning, said Monte Cristo.
And when may we have the honour of seeing you again, your Excellency? Asked Cavalcanti.
Ah, said Andre, when may we hope for that pleasure? On Saturday, if you will. Yes. Let me see. Saturday. I am to dine at my country house at Auteuil on that day, Rue de la Fontaine, number 28. Several persons are invited, and, among others, Monsieur Danglars, your banker. I will introduce you to him, for it will be necessary he should know you, as he is to pay your money.
Full dress? Said the Major, half aloud.
Oh, yes, certainly, said the Count. Uniform, cross, knee breeches. And how shall I be dressed? Demanded Andre. Oh, very simply. Black trousers, patent leather boots, white waistcoat, either a black or blue coat, and a long cravat. Go to Blin or Veronique for your clothes. Baptistin will tell you where if you do not know their address. The less pretension there is in your attire, the better will be the effect, as you are a rich man. If you mean to buy any horses, get them at Devereux, and if you purchase a phaeton, go to Baptiste for it. At what hour shall we come? Asked the young man. About 6:30.
We will be with you at that time, said the Major.
The two Cavalcanti bowed to the Count and left the house. Monte Cristo went to the window and saw them crossing the street arm in arm. There go two miscreants, said he. It is a pity they are not really related. Then, after an instant of gloomy reflection, "Come, I will go to see the Morels," said he. "I think that disgust is even more sickening than hatred." End of chapter 56.